I hadn't been home in 7 years, and yet nothing had changed. Except me. The train from D.C. to Brooklyn felt longer than it should have. I watched the skyline stretch and blur through the window, wondering if the city could tell I was different now. It didn't matter. Home wasn't the buildings. It was that 3-story brownstone, and the people inside who'd already decided who I was. I stepped off at Atlantic Terminal and dragged my small suitcase across the same cracked sidewalk I used to run on when I was 10. There were new storefronts, but the air still carried the same blend of hot concrete, coffee, and ambition. I didn't call anyone. I didn't want a welcome. I just needed to finish what I started when I left. The house looked the same. The steps creaked the same. The doorbell buzzed like it had always been slightly annoyed. And then came Mom, flawless as always, in a soft pink blouse, with earrings that said, "I tried just enough." "Madeline," she said, one cheek kiss, not two. "You're early. You said dinner was at 6. It is, I just didn't expect punctuality." I smiled, tight. Guess some things do change. Inside, the lemon cleaner hit first, then the roast chicken. Same combination since I was a kid. My shoes clicked across the wood floor, past the hall of family photos. Julian everywhere. Acceptance. Letter first apartment, baby's first steps. My military medals? Not even a magnet on the fridge. Julian's bringing the baby. Marissa couldn't come, Mom said. Client dinner, she's up for partner. Good for her. Isn't it? And Julian just got promoted again. VP of Acquisitions, Midtown deal. I set my bag down. He's on fire. You should talk to him. He knows people who help with transitions. If you're ever ready to move out of uniform. I turned away before she could see my face. Upstairs, my old room was frozen in time. High school trophies, honor roll certificates, the same worn copy of the bell jar on the nightstand. Nothing after 21. As if my entire adult life had been an unfinished draft they chose not to read. I unzipped my bag and looked at the carefully folded uniform. Silver eagles gleamed under the soft light. Colonel. Not assistant, not junior analyst, not still figuring it out. Colonel. And tomorrow they'd all see it. Before I continue this story, I'd love to know, have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where you knew you were finally ready to walk into a room as the version of yourself no one ever believed you could become? If so, share your story in the comments. And if you want to hear how this one unfolds, hit that like and subscribe button. What's coming next? It's something they never saw coming. Tomorrow, I would walk into Lockhart Dynamics not as an intern, not as someone tagging along, but as the final authority on a multi-billion-dollar defense contract. I was the United States Army's appointed liaison. I was the one whose sign-off meant go or stop. But tonight? Tonight, I would sit across from my family, play the role one last time, and let them write their version of me. One more night. They didn't know who was coming to dinner, and they definitely didn't know who'd be walking into that boardroom. I closed the door to my old room, leaving the still air and frozen memories behind. The soft creak of the stairs beneath my feet was the only sound as I walked down toward the kitchen, already filled with the scent of rosemary chicken and something faintly burnt, probably the sweet potatoes. Mom's favorite combo. She stood at the stove in her signature apron, stirring a pot that didn't need stirring. When she heard me, she turned but didn't smile like someone genuinely happy to see her daughter after years away. It was more. The smile you offer a neighbor dropping by unannounced. "Dinner's almost ready," she said, matter of fact. I nodded. "Smells good." "It's Julian's favorite. I made the asparagus the way he likes it. Grilled, not steamed." "Remember how picky he was as a kid?" I didn't answer. I remembered. He got grilled asparagus. I got, "Just eat what's on your plate." The dining room had been freshly set, the same lace tablecloth from every childhood holiday, a full setting. For 6, though there were only 4 of us now. I noticed the extra place and wondered if they'd invited someone else. Or maybe it was just instinct, muscle memory. Or maybe they hadn't thought about me at all when setting the table, just filled in the blanks the way they always did. Mom brought over a dish and placed it in the center of the table. "Sit wherever," she said before walking back into the kitchen. I sat at the far end, the seat I used to take when Julian brought friends over and I wasn't supposed to dominate the conversation. I looked around the room. Nothing had changed. Same framed wedding photo of my parents, same crystal cabinet, same clock that had stopped working the year I enlisted. Dad entered with a glass of scotch already in hand. "You came," he said, and for a second, I thought maybe there'd be more. "Yeah," I replied. He nodded once, sat down, and scrolled on his phone. There was no welcome back. No "how have you been?" Just a quiet shuffle of plates and passive anticipation. I realized, then this wasn't about reconnecting. This dinner wasn't for me. It was another performance, another carefully orchestrated moment for the family highlight reel. And I was just background. Mom came back in carrying the gravy boat and caught me looking at the table setting. "You're not allergic to anything new, are you?" she asked. "Nope." "Well, that's good. Julian's son has all kinds of sensitivities now. Marissa says he might be gluten intolerant. She's on top of all those things. She's a lawyer, right? Partner track, sharp girl, a tone I'd never heard her use for me. "I'm sure Julian's proud of her," I said, careful not to inject anything extra into the words. "Of course. They're a great team." She didn't ask if I was seeing anyone, if I was happy, if I ever wanted a family. There was no curiosity about who I'd become, just a soft resume reel playing on loop, all Julian's. I got up and walked toward the living room while they arranged serving dishes and poured drinks. My gaze fell on the photo wall. Nothing had changed. Still no pictures of me in uniform. Still no photos from my commissioning ceremony, no snapshots from Kabul, no proud article in the regional paper with my quote about rebuilding tactical infrastructure. Just one high school graduation shot and the caption, "Our future accountant." In that moment, I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel angry. I felt done. Done trying to insert myself into a narrative they weren't willing to rewrite. Footsteps behind. Me. Dad's voice. "You know, Julian's been working with some government contracts. He might be able to connect you to something stable, if you're thinking of transitioning out." I turned to him slowly. "Thanks. I'm good where I am." He didn't press, just nodded and walked back to the table. I watched the room for a few more seconds, the way you look at a place before leaving it for the last time. Then I walked back to my seat, sat down, straightened my back, smiled quietly. I wasn't here for them. I was here for the moment after this. And that moment was coming. Julian arrived like a weather front, loud, polished, and impossible to ignore. I heard the door open downstairs while I was still lingering at the top of the staircase. My mother's voice shot up, bright and full of something that sounded like pride. "There he is. Julian, over here. Let me see the baby." I stayed out of view for a moment, listening. Julian laughed, smooth and practiced. "Traffic's a nightmare, Mom. I swear I spent more time circling for parking than I did on the BQE. The kind of complaint people like him made with charm. He always knew how to be effortlessly likable, especially in front of the people who needed an heir." I made my way down slowly, catching the sight of him setting the car seat down like he was handling a rare artifact. My mother was already cooing at the infant, and my father had set down his wine to stand and greet him with a firm handshake. No one noticed me until I cleared the last step. Julian turned, all smiles. Look who made it back to Brooklyn. Hi, I said, standing just a little straighter than I needed to. Still rocking the camo life? He asked, eyes flicking from my plain black turtleneck to my boots, like he was searching for signs of uniform even in civilian clothes. I smiled. Still, he gave a short laugh like we were in on the same joke. That's commitment. I couldn't do it. You know that. I know, I said. I really did. We all moved toward the dining room. The table was already set. 6 places, name cards, cloth napkins folded with care. My mom had lit candles. This was her version of ceremony. As we sat, I noticed how everything about the room seemed to orbit Julian. The conversation leaned toward his world. How fast the baby was growing, how Marissa was already tracking nursery schools, how his firm had just taken over a new project downtown. My father chimed in to ask about commercial square footage like he'd memorized the sales brief. I mostly listened. At one point, Mom turned to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. You're still stationed in D.C., right? I'm based there, yes. That must be steady, she said. Then, turning right back to Julian, you remember how much you hated D.C. in college? Bureaucracy gives me hives, Julian said, laughing again. Then came the inevitable moment. My father, halfway through his glass of red, looked directly at me and said, You know, if you ever decide it's time to start planning long-term, your brother's firm is growing fast. There's always room for someone with discipline. Maybe, on the operations side, I waited a beat. I appreciate that, I said, and left it there. Julian leaned back in his chair. It's true. We're always looking for people who can handle pressure. I mean, not combat, obviously, but the real world's got its own battles, right? The table chuckled. I didn't. There was a moment, quick, almost invisible, where my hand brushed my thigh where the dress uniform hung upstairs in a zipped garment bag, the one with my rank stitched over the heart, the one that no one here had ever asked to see. I looked across the table and realized something that settled deeper than irritation. They weren't malicious. They just didn't know how to imagine me outside the version they'd frozen in place. I was a teenage girl with a scholarship, a bright kid who could have done so many things but chose the military like it was a detour. They couldn't see what I'd built because it didn't look like Julian. It didn't live in condos or quarterly bonuses. That night, I listened as they talked about things I'd long stopped chasing. I answered when spoken to. I smiled when appropriate, and I thought, you have no idea who's sitting at your table. Tomorrow, they would. My old room was a shrine to the daughter I used to be. I stood in the doorway longer than I meant to. Everything looked untouched. The same lavender walls. The same corkboard covered in ribbons and perfectly pinned Polaroids. My name, still, glittered above the bed in those plastic gold letters Mom hot-glued when I was 12. The shelves were lined with SAT prep books and trophies. Debate team, cheer captain, a framed photo of me holding a college acceptance letter with braces and a smile that didn't yet know what war looked like. But not one photo in uniform. Not one of my medals. Not one framed article from the promotions or the defense commendation I got 3 years ago. It was like everything after 18 had been airbrushed out. I sat on the edge of the bed, the comforter still that same soft coral. It didn't even smell like time had passed. Just a constant loop of before. I leaned back and looked at the ceiling. Same tiny stars from when I thought glow in the dark was magic. Same crack in the corner from the time I'd thrown a softball too hard practicing. Form. Same room. Same girl. Except not. Back then, I was on every school committee, the golden child. I knew exactly what my parents wanted. Prestige with Polish. I was supposed to go Ivy League, marry someone with an MBA, host brunches, and send holiday. Newsletters with embossed headers. Instead, I joined a world where holidays meant FaceTime calls from a base, where brunch was MREs under sandblasted tents, where leadership meant watching someone break under pressure and still showing up the next day. But none of that made it onto these walls. They wanted the cheerleader. They buried the colonel. I walked over to the bookshelf and pulled out an old yearbook. I hadn't opened it in years. My senior quote was still circled in pink ink. What you do makes a difference. You just have to decide what kind. At 17, I thought that meant starting a nonprofit or mentoring younger girls. At 23, I led my first unit into a conflict zone. At 32, I ran strategy for regional deployments and signed off on ops reports that changed real lives. And somehow, none of that had earned a spot on the corkboard. I put the book down, walked to the dresser, and opened the top drawer. Still there, tucked under old scarves and faded high school t-shirts, my dress uniform, folded, clean, pressed. The silver insignia glinted faintly in the light. I laid it across the bed, beside the old cheer uniform I hadn't realized Mom had kept in a shadow box above the desk. 2 uniforms, 2 stories. Only one had a place in this house. They say home is where they remember who you are. Sometimes it's where they refuse to see who you've become. Before I continue this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or your country in the comments. And if you've ever felt like your growth made you a stranger in your own home, hit that like and subscribe. Trust me, you're not alone. I stepped back from the bed and looked around one last time. Nothing in this room had changed, except me. They thought I ran away. Truth is, I ran toward something bigger. We were halfway through dinner when the conversation turned, as it always did, to Julian's college years. Princeton stories, networking mixers. That one time he out-negotiated a professor in class. The table laughed. My mother beamed. My father topped off his wine. You almost went to NYU, right? Dad said suddenly, turning to me like he'd just remembered I was there. I did get in, I said. Full admission. Just not full scholarship. That's right, Mom added. We told you to defer, reapply. No reason to jump in with debt. What they didn't say, they didn't offer to help. Not then. Not the way they'd helped Julian. Not the way they'd floated him between internships and startups and figuring it out. Julian looked at me, tilting his head. And you just went Army instead? I smiled faintly. Not quite how it happened. Pretty close, though, he said, laughing like it was charmingly reckless. I set my fork down and leaned back slightly. I was 19, I began. I was working part-time, tutoring, commuting. NYU was possible, but only in theory. Then a staff sergeant came to campus one day with brochures for ROTC. I stayed after the session, asked questions, ran through the numbers. A week later, I filled out the application. I looked around the table. No one interrupted, but no one nodded either. I got the scholarship, full ride, in exchange for service. Julian raised his brows. That's a serious trade-off. It was, I said. And I made it with both eyes open. Mom shifted in her seat. We just didn't understand why you didn't talk to us first. Because I knew what you'd say, I replied. That it was too drastic, too rigid, that I had too much potential to waste in the military. That's not what we meant, Dad said, not quite convincingly. No, you never said it like that. You said things like, there's still time to change your mind, and maybe this is just rebellion. You called it a detour. I called it purpose. The room went quiet. I could hear the faint hum of the fridge behind me. ROTC didn't. Just give me money. It gave me clarity. It gave me structure. It gave me a place where effort translated directly into trust. Rank. Responsibility. It gave me consequences that meant something. It gave me lives to protect. I glanced at Julian, who was suddenly very focused on his glass. I know you all thought I bailed on the plan, I said. That I traded promise for discipline. But you were never really looking at what I chose. You were just fixated on what I didn't. They thought I ran away. Truth is, I ran towards something bigger. Mom reached for the gravy boat, then paused, hand in midair, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. You all had a version of me mapped out, I continued. But that version didn't ask questions, didn't challenge timelines, didn't go off script. I took a breath. Well, I did. And it made me someone I actually respect. Julian finally looked up. I didn't know it meant that much to you. I didn't need you to know, but I needed you to stop assuming it meant less. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter, just clear. I chose duty. They chose not to see it. That was the quiet truth behind every shrug, every joke, every time they asked if I was thinking of transitioning out. They never imagined this could be my whole life, not because I couldn't do more, but because they couldn't imagine this was enough. I looked around the table. No one spoke. No one pushed back. For the first time that evening, I felt like they were hearing the version of the story I had always lived, and I wasn't going to let them forget it. You still do whatever it is you do? Julian smirked across the table, his fork lazily pushing around a piece of grilled asparagus, like the question itself was harmless. I took a slow sip of water, then looked at him. Yeah, I still do. He nodded, grinning like we were sharing an inside joke. Like the last 15 years were just a quirky phase. The conversation shifted again, back to real estate naturally. Julian's firm had just closed a new development in Dumbo. Something, with river views and rooftop gardens. My dad was riveted. Smart play, he said, tapping the edge of his wine glass. Buy now, flip before Q4. I like it. You've always had a nose for timing. Julian shrugged like modesty was part of the performance. It's all in the data, that and knowing who to trust. Mom turned to him, lighting up. Honestly, it's so refreshing to hear someone talk about growth. Everyone your age just seems stuck. You're moving. You're building something. I cut a piece of chicken without comment. Then Dad looked at me. And you? Still at the same rank? What's the term? Captain? Lieutenant? Colonel, I said quietly but clearly. He blinked. Oh, that's impressive. I didn't realize. Julian whistled, low and mock-surprised. Colonel? That's a real title, huh? I smiled, just slightly. It is. There was a pause. No one said congratulations. No one asked what it took. No one wondered what I led or where I'd been. Instead, Mom reached for another compliment to drop in Julian's lap. You know what I love? She said. That you're building something real, something tangible. Homes, not just policies or reports, things people can touch. Julian chuckled, brushing off the praise with the same practiced ease he always had. Well, we try. And, just like that, I was invisible again. Every word out of Julian's mouth was weighted with purpose. Strategic pauses, effortless laughs, the occasional reference to someone at the mayor's office. He was charming in a way that required no substance, just momentum and tone. I looked at my plate. Every bite tasted like rehearsal. I've read your unit handles logistics now, right? Mom asked suddenly, looking at me as if she were trying to recall a fun fact from a trivia game. I nodded. Among other things, must be a lot of paperwork, she said. You've always been organized. That skill translates anywhere. It wasn't a compliment. It was a consolation. Julian leaned over his plate again. You ever think about pivoting? A lot of people burn out in public service, especially the high-stress stuff. You've been doing that, what, over a decade? 13 years. I said, that's a full chapter, he said, raising his eyebrows. Time for the next one? Maybe, I said. Maybe not. But inside, I already knew. They had no idea what I'd done, what I still did, what it meant to lead, to carry, the weight of decisions no spreadsheet could simulate. What it meant to wear a uniform, knowing every bar on your chest came with a cost. They saw medals as decoration, not currency. They saw my life as a footnote, and in their eyes, I was still the kid with potential, not the woman who'd already surpassed every metric they thought mattered. Tomorrow, they would see. Tomorrow, I would walk into that boardroom as the highest-ranking federal representative in the room. I would sign the final authorization that would determine whether Lockhart Dynamics got the contract that could change their fiscal year. They didn't know I was the one Lockhart's legal team had been prepping for, the one who had read every line of their proposal, the one who could say yes or no. Tonight, they laughed. Tomorrow, they'd be silent. If not for General Stokes, I might have walked away too. It was my second year in. Still green, still uncertain. I'd just transferred to a joint task force team stationed out in Virginia. Most of the others had a decade on me, and every meeting felt like walking into a room where I had to prove I deserved a seat. Again, I kept my head down. I studied hard, ran drills late, memorized everything. Still, I was invisible, or worse, forgettable, until the day everything went sideways. There was a training simulation that ran off real-time intelligence. One of our analysts flagged a breach, pattern that didn't match the input. I caught it. Something felt off. Too regular, too clean. Like it had been manufactured to mislead. I flagged it, rewrote the logic tree, reran the scenario, and within 3 minutes, we were staring at a vulnerability buried in our encryption process. It was hypothetical, but barely. If it had been real, lives would have been at stake. After the briefing, most people left the room like nothing had happened. A few muttered good catch. Nothing more. But then, she walked in. General Lillian Stokes, I'd only seen her from across auditoriums. Silver hair tight in a bun, ribbons like a timeline of command, and eyes that didn't miss anything. She didn't do small talk. She didn't do hand-holding. She stood in front of me and said, "That logic jump. That wasn't luck." "No, ma'am," I said, heart hammering. "Who trained you to think like that?" I hesitated. "I trained myself mostly." She studied me for a moment. "Then we need to start building more of you." That was the beginning. She pulled me into side projects no one else knew about. Taught me how to read silence in a room faster than you read a dossier. She let me shadow secure comms meetings, drilled me on strategy, made me rework security protocols. 3 times until they were fail-proof. She gave me nothing for free and everything that mattered. She called it tactical literacy. I called it learning how to breathe without noise. She never said she was proud. She never coddled. But one day, after I'd successfully managed an information leak risk during a simulated embassy breach, she stood in front of the team and said, "Colonel Hayes did what others missed." She didn't just see the threat. She predicted its shape. And in that moment, I knew. Someone finally saw me for what I actually brought to the table. Not loyalty, not politeness, not potential, precision, pattern recognition, quiet authority. Stokes didn't care that I didn't come from legacy, that my family had stopped asking what I did after year 5, that no one in my house even knew her name. She cared that I showed up sharper than the mission required. She gave me her time, her standards, and eventually, her endorsement. That endorsement got me into Central Command rotation. That rotation led to Task Force Bravo 6, then to Strategic Operations Liaison, and then here. She saw what my own family couldn't. She saw a leader. Tomorrow, Lockhart Dynamics would meet their liaison and their reckoning. At exactly 6 a.m., my internal clock woke me, not the alarm, not the hum of early morning traffic outside my childhood window. Just precision. The kind you don't lose, no matter how far from base you sleep. The house was quiet. Julian's baby must have finally fallen asleep. Mom hadn't started coffee yet. I moved like muscle memory, controlled, silent, deliberate. The uniform lay across the armchair where I'd left it. Midnight blue, silver eagle insignia gleaming, collar sharp, lines perfect. It had traveled with me from Kabul to Berlin to D.C., and now, here. To the same house where I once had to ask permission to stay out past 10, I dressed slowly, making each motion matter. Jacket, belt, insignia, shoes, watch. It wasn't just about appearance, it was declaration. From my duffel, I pulled the leather-bound folder that held everything: project analysis, encrypted security evaluations, and the contract summary for the Lockhart Defense Initiative, a $1.4 billion counter-cyber intelligence investment. 4 corporations were in final review. Lockhart Dynamics was the only one with a questionable subcontractor linked to foreign data breaches in 2019. They thought we'd missed that. They were wrong. The agency hadn't made a decision yet, but they'd asked me to. I opened my laptop and clicked through the final slides. High-level threat analysis, budget disbursement forecasts, personnel clearance audits, and one folder tagged pending in red. Inside, a photo of Julian at Lockhart's holiday event last December, champagne in hand, standing beside 2 executives, currently flagged for ethics violations. It wasn't damning, but it wasn't nothing. I leaned back. Not surprised, just still. It wasn't about him, or even them. It was about how small their world had always been, how they thought everything ran on charm, handshakes, and the right dinner guest list. This world, the one I operated in, ran on precision, on intelligence, on quiet records that never made it to public forums. And right now, every line of Lockhart's proposal ran through me. A colonel in the United States Army, Department of Defense liaison, oversight signatory. They had no idea. I checked my phone. A single text from General Stokes. Your call. Trust your gut. I opened the secure portal and began drafting my recommendation. The tone was clinical, unemotional, but the message was absolute. Lockhart Dynamics does not meet the threshold for national defense partnership at this time. 1 click, 1 signature, 1 decision. Then I saved the file, zipped the portfolio, and slipped it into my attaché. Downstairs I could hear silverware clinking. Mom setting the table, probably for breakfast, probably for one more family performance, but not for me. I stood in front of the mirror one last time. My reflection didn't blink. They think I'm the girl who left. I'm the woman who returned in command. I wasn't nervous. I was rehearsed. The city unfolded beneath my wheels like it had something to prove. It was still early, but Manhattan never really slept. It just shifted gears. Taxi horns, scaffolding crews, delivery trucks, all of it humming. Like the world had deadlines it wasn't willing to miss. I drove myself, could have taken a car service, but I needed the silence. Needed the space between my breath and the morning traffic to remind myself who I was. Not just the uniform, but the woman inside it. At 47th and Park, the Lockhart building rose like polished arrogance. 40 stories of smoked glass and brushed steel. Their name was carved into the stone base in that kind of font that says, "You don't belong here unless we say so." I pulled into the underground garage, flashed my temporary clearance badge at the scanner. The guard took one look at the military plates and stiffened slightly. "You're here for level 17, I said. DOD liaison, Madeline Hayes. He double-checked his list. "You're early." "Always am." He waved me through. The elevator was a private express, secured access only. No music, just a whisper of motion. As I ascended, I reviewed the key names. Martin Keller, CFO, Nadine Glass, head of government relations. And someone from the board was rumored to sit in, possibly Dyer himself. Founder, untouchable, or so they thought. The doors opened to a hallway of glass-walled offices and carpet that probably cost more per square foot than most apartments. I walked through like I belonged, because I did. A young man in a blazer stood up at the reception desk. "Hi there. Are you here for—" "Yes," I said. "Colonel Hayes. Here for the 8:30. His eyes flicked to the badge. "Right, of course. This way." He led me past a row of open offices. People peeked up from behind monitors. Some curious, some suspicious. Most just assuming I was someone's assistant with a particularly serious wardrobe. Outside the conference room, I paused. Through the glass, I could see them already gathered. Suits, tablets, water glasses already sweating on coasters. Martin Keller was adjusting his tie in the reflection of the glass wall. Nadine was whispering something to the associate beside her. None of them knew. None of them had connected the dots between their contract delay and the woman who was about to sit at the head of the table. The door opened from the inside. "Colonel Hayes," someone said, a little too late. I stepped in, portfolio in hand. "Good morning," I said. A few stood, some just nodded. Dyer wasn't there, not yet. That was fine. I took my seat, centered the folder in front of me, and glanced at the screen behind them, already queued up with a slide deck they thought I hadn't seen yet. I had. Every chart, every footnote, every omission. I knew which slide had been removed since last week. I knew who'd signed off on it. Let the games begin. Julian looked up from his tablet and froze. The elevator door slid open on the 17th floor, and there he was, half leaning against the glass security railing, scrolling through something on his screen like the world was his waiting room. He hadn't seen me at first. My boots didn't make much noise on the carpet, and I moved with the kind of stillness that doesn't announce itself. But as the elevator hissed shut behind me, and I took a single step forward, his head lifted. Recognition didn't come immediately. His eyes scanned my face first, probably registering something familiar but out of place. Then his gaze dropped, and I watched it happen in real time. The black dress uniform, the nameplate, the silver eagle on my chest. The shock flickered like static across his face. "Madeline," he said, not quite a question, not quite a greeting. "Morning," I replied, calm and unhurried. He blinked, almost comically. Why are you—" "Working," I said simply. He straightened, eyes still flicking between my uniform, and my face like one might disappear if he stared hard enough. "I didn't know you were coming in today." "You wouldn't," I said. "It wasn't your meeting." He opened his mouth, closed it, then laughed lightly like it was a shared prank. "Wait, hold on, you're here. With the Army?" "Technically," I said. "I'm here with the Department of Defense." His posture shifted, just slightly. That smile he always wore, the one designed to charm, disarm, and buy him time, started to falter. "I thought you worked in logistics or something," he said. "Like admin, procurement." I tilted my head. "Is that what Mom told you?" "I mean," he trailed off. "So what? What exactly do you do now?" I stepped past him and tapped my badge against the reader beside the internal conference. Room door. It clicked open with a low buzz. "See you in the boardroom," I said over my shoulder. He didn't respond. I didn't look back. Inside the room, executives sat in varying states of tension and performance, some sipping coffee, some flipping through printed packets, others making calculated eye contact across the table. I took my seat again. Same posture, same calm. A minute later, the door opened behind me. Julian stepped in, still holding his tablet like it was a shield. His eyes scanned the room and landed on me. I didn't move. Someone from Lockhart's legal team looked between us, then leaned toward Julian. "You two know each other?" "She's my sister," he said automatically. There was a beat of silence. Then, "She's the colonel?" Julian didn't answer. His brain was still catching up. Mine had been ready for this moment for years. He lowered himself into the chair across from me, more slowly than usual. Less swagger, more calculation. For once, I didn't need to say a word. The insignia said enough. But just before the meeting began, I leaned forward, voice low enough for only him to hear. "They think I'm here to review documents." I smiled. "I'm here to decide the outcome." "Colonel Carter?" I thought this was just a formality. The words slipped out from the boardroom's far end, a low murmur from someone who hadn't been briefed properly. Or maybe they had, just not enough to anticipate the woman sitting, where they expected a quiet observer. Camilla Dyer, Lockhart's CEO, didn't miss a beat. She stood, heels clicking softly against the floor, and nodded to me with calm precision. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, addressing the room, "this is Colonel Madeline Carter, Department of Defense Liaison. She is not here as a courtesy. She has final review and approval authority on the Lockhart Initiative." A visible shift rippled across the table. Chairs straightened, eyes narrowed. Tablets were subtly flipped open again, as if people were suddenly scrambling to remember what Slide 23 said, or whether any of the numbers had been tweaked since last Thursday. I watched it happen. I watched grown executives try to rearrange their posture and tone in real time, now that the person they'd overlooked had walked in as the decision-maker. Then I heard the sound I didn't expect, a fork dropping onto china. My father, 2 seats down from Julian, had arrived late and settled in quietly, sipping black coffee and pretending he wasn't just here because Julian had insisted it would look good to have a family presence. He had no idea what this meeting was really about. He thought it was just another networking opportunity, until now. He looked at Camilla, then at me, then back again. His jaw didn't just drop, it shattered. Julian, to his credit, didn't say a word. His shoulders had gone stiff, his eyes darting between me and the CEO like he'd missed the twist ending in a movie he thought he understood. Camilla smiled politely. "Colonel Carter has been working closely with our legal and compliance teams over the last quarter. Today she'll be reviewing our final presentation and offering her recommendation to the department." A man across from me, one of the senior B partners, cleared his throat. "We were under the impression we'd already passed through all security audits." "You passed preliminary," I said calmly. "Today is post-due diligence verification. For a $1.4 billion award, we don't skip layers." The room stilled. I flipped open my folder and began laying out the papers. "I'll need clarity on the timeline of your subcontractor partnerships, particularly with Amtrak Solutions. There's a flagged anomaly on your Q2 reporting that doesn't match federal compliance logs." Julian blinked. "Wait, that's what you—" "This is what I've always done," I said, not looking at him. Camilla nodded, giving me the floor. It wasn't showmanship. It was authority. Earned, not gifted. As I continued, I caught my father's expression, confusion laced with something dangerously close to shame. The same man who once told me I should have done something safer, that leadership was for people who make noise, not girls who disappear for years. He didn't say a word now. They all sat, silent, as I walked them through timelines, risks, and ethics compliance. As I asked questions no one else in the room seemed ready for. As I made it impossible for them to ignore who I was and who I'd become. This wasn't just a reveal. It was a reckoning, and no one at that table. Not Julian, not my father, not the polished board behind Camilla, would ever look at me the same way again. I didn't need to raise my voice. My rank did it for me. By the time we hit slide 14, Julian was sweating. Not visibly. He was too polished for that. But the signs were there. The tap of his finger against the edge of his tablet. The way he stopped making eye contact. The slight twitch of his jaw every time I flipped a page in my folder and paused. We were deep into the section on subcontractor vetting when I stopped him mid-sentence. "Julian," I said, calm but sharp, "can you clarify the vetting process? Your team used for the third-party encryption consultants from Q1? He froze. All eyes shifted to him. He glanced at the projector as if the slides might save him. That was, I believe handled by compliance, but I can check the documentation. They've already sent it, I interrupted. It's incomplete. A low ripple moved across the room. Camilla Dyer didn't move, didn't blink. She was watching. Julian closely now, no longer like a trusted partner, but like a liability under review. Julian cleared his throat. I wasn't directly overseeing that line item. But you signed off, I said, lifting the document. Right here. April 19th, your initials. He looked at the page, then at me. For the first time in our entire lives, I saw something behind his eyes that wasn't smugness or performance. I saw fear. Those consultants were cleared by a previous audit. They were cleared on paper, I said. Not in practice. Their firm was flagged in 2020 for failure to disclose financial ties to a non-allied third party, a fact your team either didn't catch or didn't think would matter. He opened his mouth again. I didn't give him the us chance. This contract isn't just about budget lines and back-end integrations, I said, turning to the rest of the room. It's about federal security, which means every signature on these pages carries weight, especially when those signatures belong to someone personally connected to other stakeholders in this room. Now they all looked between us. Julian swallowed. Are you implying? I'm stating, I said, that your name on this contract creates the appearance of conflict. And if I can see it, so can the department. He sat back in his chair, like the wind had been knocked out of him. Silence wrapped the boardroom like a vice. I stood slowly. You may resubmit your proposal with a revised contractor list and clean security clearance, or you may withdraw entirely. But in its current form, this deal isn't going through. Camilla's expression didn't change, but she gave the smallest nod of acknowledgement. Julian looked to our father. He was staring at the table. No rescue coming, no redirect, just silence. I built this deal, Julian said softly, almost to himself. I looked straight at him. Then you should have built it better. A long pause, and then I said it, the final sentence that closed the room. Submit again, or don't. Either way, it won't pass. I gathered my notes, and for the first time since I was 16 years old, my brother had no comeback. They came to pitch. I came to evaluate. Once they cleared the conflict of interest question, Lockhart's technical team, engineers, data compliance officers, cybersecurity leads, stepped forward. They carried confidence like a badge. The room shifted from boardroom to briefing room, their posture straightening as they began presenting. I listened, attentive. Not as a guest, not as a token, but as someone equipped to challenge every assumption. The lead engineer, a young woman named Priya, started detailing encryption architecture. She spoke quickly, mentioning APIs, asymmetric key rotations, continuous monitoring. Most of the room nodded along, accepting it as expert talk. I interrupted her calmly. What's your fallback if the event detection system suffers a latency spike during a cyber threat? 5 seconds of delay could mean thousands of compromised records. She paused, surprised. Few had asked that kind of sharp, deliberate question. And when she answered, I followed up. How do you correlate timestamp provenance across multi-cloud instances? What's the fail-safe if your master key is revoked mid-cycle? The engineers shifted, clearly warmed up by actual scrutiny. Priya flipped through her tablet and answered with specifics, data logs, hex-level commits, failover prioritization. There was a tension in the room. The question forced tech leadership to deliver substance, not showmanship. Camilla leaned in, impressed. Priya, he's on point. Good call. She turned and looked at me. I didn't move. Then she stood. Colonel Carter has complete operational oversight on the security model here. Priya, fine-tune the latency countermeasures. I want a revised Protocol document by EOD, Priya nodded. Yes, ma'am. The shift was subtle but absolute. I wasn't just included in the meeting, I was steering it. They launched into architecture reviews. I held the floor. My questions weren't surface level. They were filters. Every corner case got assessed. Every hypothetical exploit got acknowledged. I could see real focus on every engineer's face, as if they finally got why compliance wasn't just red tape. It was the foundation of trust. The CTO looked like he'd just discovered gravity. He closed his mouth and tapped his pen thoughtfully. I waited. Then Camilla said it, loud enough for everyone. Colonel, thank you. You don't just belong at the head of this table. You run it. There wasn't applause, but the silence at the end of that line felt heavier than any round of claps. I sat back in my chair, satisfied, not because I'd made them rotate their thinking, but because I'd shifted the shape of the room. I didn't just belong in the room. I ran it. That's your daughter? Someone whispered. The words drifted through the room like smoke, impossible to ignore. My posture didn't change. I was seated at the head of the table, poised, eyes steady. But inside, hope and irony flickered. Together. The woman who had underestimated me most was now staring at me, trying to reconcile the badge and uniform with the surname. The question came from Emily Chen, the senior engineer whose husband reported directly to my father. She looked at me, then at Dad. Confusion painted on her face like she'd just found a secret scribbled behind a school locker. Everything slowed. The hum of air conditioning, the flip of paper, the tick of a clock. Even Julian shifted in his seat as if trying to move out of an old photograph. My father, Mr. Williams in this room, finally noticed. His gaze dropped from my star-studded epaulette to me. His eyes widened as he realized who I was. It wasn't a loud realization, no dramatic gasp. But beneath the calm, I felt the shifts. Admission, recognition, regret. The same man who once told me to take the safe path now froze under the weight of an identity he refused to acknowledge. Camilla didn't hesitate. She moved forward, calm but decisive. Mr. Williams, with your permission, she began, using his formal name rather than Dad or William, drawing a line both subtle and deliberate. Colonel Carter will be taking the lead on revisions to the security protocols. She has the expertise. She has command. My father swallowed one long, quiet movement. He nodded, eyes shifting between pride and something he struggled to name. He'd come to meet his son's wife, but found himself face to face with his daughter's reality. The technical team, all aware of his connection now, looked at me like they'd found the link they didn't know they were missing. Emily stepped in, voice more measured now. Colonel Carter, could you repeat your requirement on penetration testing cycles for Tier 1 data? We want to confirm we follow your standard. I took a breath. The request was solid, professional. It had nothing to do with family, everything to do with leadership. I smiled politely. Professional, composed, clear. Absolutely. We'll need weekly audits for the first quarter post-integration. After that, we can shift to bi-weekly but maintain live cyber honeypot monitoring at Tier 1 endpoints. I'll send the guidelines by noon. Camilla signaled and Emily nodded, issuing quick instructions to her team. The mood iced over, productive, focused, purposeful. But I sensed Dad still watching. Julian's features softened. Pity? Respect? Something they hadn't earned until tonight. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. I leaned back into my chair. My mind retracted from people's assumptions. I didn't owe them more than a clear statement of expectations. I didn't owe them an apology. I didn't owe them affirmation. This was business. And tonight, they were learning their place again. My father's jaw clenched, his hand still on the edge of the table long after Emily left. He finally exhaled, almost inaudibly. He swallowed again, steadying himself. For a moment, I thought he would reach across the table. But he didn't. He sat there, stillness in his posture, eyes acknowledging but unwilling to go further. That was fine. My duty was served. My mother's silent pride and regret simmered in the room's edges. Julian's shock melted into a new respect, his posture unguarded, his breathing slower, his walls down. The CEO watched, satisfied. The room pivoted to action, not family dramas. I wiped a bead of condensation from my glass. The folder was nearly closed, the final questions answered. No one offered applause. No one cheered. There wasn't anything to say except to listen, comply, proceed, because in the quiet, real work spoke louder than words. I smiled politely. I didn't owe them more than that. Dad invited me to his office, not knowing he'd be the one questioned. He'd asked me to stay behind after the meeting ended, on the pretense of a quiet chat in his personal office, glass walls overlooking Manhattan traffic, the view he sometimes bragged belonged with that title of Chairman Williams. I expected small talk, maybe a well done buried in a bigger lecture. I walked in thinking steadiness would serve me best. Instead, he closed the door behind me and didn't sit. His gaze was steady but unreadable. Maybe pride mixed with regret. I offered a polite nod. He looked down at the papers on his desk. Contracts, quarterly earnings, employee rosters. Not one of them had my name on it until this morning. I wanted to see you, he began, voice even. Eyes flicked to framed family photos. There we were, my brother's graduation, my parents at a fundraiser. None of me. I saw what happened in the meeting, he said. The way you took charge. The questions you asked. That was my job, I said simply. He leaned back. You weren't always like that. You dropped off at 19. Went silent. I thought about it. I showed up in ways I thought mattered. He paused. The ROTC commissioning ceremony. I got the invite, but I didn't come. I cleaned up something else I had going that night. His voice softened. I was proud that day, but I thought if I went, I'd embarrass you. All that. Uniform and rank. You didn't come, I said. That's why I thought maybe I didn't belong. His shoulders shifted. I thought I was protecting you. Protecting me from what? I asked. He glanced at a photo of my younger self. From the expectations. The pressures of being our daughter. I thought if I stayed out, you could choose. And I chose, I said. Every step. Not just for me, but for people who never got a voice. He swallowed. The day you announced you were going to Afghanistan, I got an email from the military. Colonel Hayes. I nodded quietly. He traced the name with his finger. Madeline Hayes, not Williams. Command changed that, I said. It became my identity where it mattered. His gaze flickered. I saw you at West Point graduation. Videos. Didn't clap. I stared at him, evaluating. You didn't clap, he said again. Not because I didn't deserve it, but because you asked me if I was sure it was the right path. I watched him, this man who had once cut a ribbon at Julian's condo opening, wrestle with history. I didn't hide, I said softly. They refused to look. He didn't respond for a long moment. Then he took a breath. I'm sorry, he said, barely louder than a whisper. For not showing up, for not telling people how remarkable you are. Sooner. My chest tightened, not because I wanted those words, but because they were finally there. He nodded toward the papers. Julia. Sorry, Colonel Carter. The board will follow your protocol recommendations. I stood. Thank you. That means everything. He held up a hand. One thing. His voice trembled slightly. Where do I even begin now? I looked at him. By looking. The glass walls refracted the traffic lights across his face. For a moment, we were no longer father and daughter, commander and board member. We were two people figuring out how to close a door and open a better one. He nodded, slowly. I left without another word. Behind me, the glass partition hummed with city noise. Inside that room, cracks started to fill with light. This isn't revenge. This is clarity. That evening, back at home, I found them waiting. Dad stood by the foyer. Mom hovered nearer the stairs, knitting needles in hand, stopped when she saw me. They weren't exactly standing guard. They were just waiting. Dad caught my eye, called me by name. Colonel Carter. It was the first time. My heart didn't lump or flutter. It just noticed. He didn't say it like they had to get it right. He said it like it belonged to me, like he'd been saying it for years. Mom closed the distance between us. I'd never seen her that still. She looked at me, really looked. Not the dress uniform, not the rank. Me. I didn't know, she said softly. We didn't know who you'd become. I nodded. You still don't need to, but you can start knowing. They didn't hug, but there wasn't distance, either. That space between us was now just empty. No noise, no performance, just timing. Dad cleared his throat. I'm proud of you. The words were simple, but I felt them like wind through glass shards. Late, yes, but clear and real. Mom touched the edge of my uniform jacket. That room today, you commanded, not for us, for them, for the job. I wasn't looking for applause, I said. I was looking for accuracy. I paused. Understanding would be nice, but it wasn't required. She nodded. We missed it. He offered his hand. Your place is here, with your achievements recognized. I took it, my grip firm, sure. Thank you. She dropped her knitting on the armchair. We'll catch up. I want to know about Stokes, about deployments. Even that night when you chose ROTC over NYU. Good, I said. Availability, minimal, but conversation, unlimited. They smiled, one of those real ones. We stepped inside the foyer. The baby's monitor beeped softly upstairs. The day had its final chord. I paused at the doorway. This doesn't fix everything. He nodded. I know. But it's a start. The light from the hallway hit the three of us together. Not perfect, but moving. I turned and headed upstairs to prepare for tomorrow's debrief. Behind me, I heard them speak quietly, maybe about dinner, maybe about how my nameplate caught the light. There was no reconciliation, not yet, but respect had been earned. I smiled, stepping toward my own. Door, feeling seen. You outrank me. By a lot, Julian muttered. We were alone at the bottom of the stairs. The hallway light blurred behind us. He looked smaller than usual. I didn't respond. He took a breath. I've been thinking, all afternoon, after you left the meeting, and after Dad asked about knowledge you didn't know he had. His voice wavered, like he was still finding the right words. Part of me, he started, paused, then continued, quieter. Part of me thinks we were always racing. You, me, college, promotions, jobs. I nodded, letting him keep going. But, he said, it wasn't a race I understood. You were playing at a level I didn't even see. I thought I was competing with my classmates. You were competing with entire systems. He rubbed at his forehead. I'm sorry I always tried to match your goals instead of seeing your path. I looked at him, waiting. I built my life thinking I was keeping pace. I poured energy into deals, bonuses, buying condos. But you were building. Impact. You didn't need to be louder. Your silence carried weight. He sighed. When Dad said, join my firm, I thought that was progress. I didn't realize progress for you would mean standing at that head of the table with your rank and authority. I thought about military. Meetings, strategy sessions, nights when decisions meant lives. It's not better. It's just different. He nodded. We were never racing, he said finally. We were just different runners. I allowed a small smile. I never saw it until tonight. He met my gaze. I'm proud of you. It took me a moment to believe, but I nodded. And I want you to know, he said, voice firmer. If you ever want to talk logistics or strategy or roast asparagus, I'm here. I laughed softly. Deal. For a moment, the tension in his shoulders washed away. The way he stood was lighter. He stepped closer. We good? I paused, then reached out and touched his arm. We are. He let out a small breath. We're not going to outdo each other anymore, he said. I shook my head slowly. No, we're just in different arenas now. He smiled, real this time. Different arenas. I turned and walked up the stairs. He followed, words unsaid but heavy, with meaning. Behind me, I heard his footsteps soften. We weren't competing anymore. We were family, understanding the race each of us ran. 6 months later, they came to me. I opened the door to my Upper West Side apartment to find Dad holding groceries and Mom carrying a homemade casserole. Julian and his wife followed behind, Julian's kid asleep in his arms. I stepped aside. Come, in. The apartment was small, but warm. My own turf now. No rows of photos or old trophies, just clean walls, a single-framed military commendation, and a soft echo of quiet confidence. We sat at the table I'd set. Fresh salad, roasted vegetables, whole grain bread, no fancy china, no lace cloth, just food done well, shared well. A reflection of the life I'd built. Mom looked around the way she does when everything's different but still feels like home. This is nice, she said. Dad nodded. Very. We passed food. Conversation started light, then shifted, naturally. So, Mom said, what's new at the office, Mom? The first time in years she'd asked me about me. I smiled. We just launched a cybersecurity pilot for a federal agency. The protocols went live last week. She looked at me. Can you walk me through that? I nodded. It's about threat mapping, real-time monitoring. It impacts national infrastructure, not just budgets. Her mouth dropped slightly. Wow, she paused. That sounds serious. It is, I said. It's why we test daily, rotate access keys, simulate attacks. Dad leaned in. And you lead that team? I nodded again. That's my role. He smiled, genuine this time. Impressive. I glanced at Julian. His eyes held understanding, not envy. A shift. He spoke first. You built that whole thing? I paused. With a few good minds. He nodded. Well done. He stood and grabbed his kid. Come on, buddy. The baby stirred. Mom handed her a blanket. She loves your place. Thank you. We cleared plates. The mood changed. Easy, relaxed, real. Mom looked at Dad. I feel like I didn't see enough, but I want to. Dad reached for her hand. Me too. Mom turned to me. Teach me what you do. Nothing formal, just an invitation. Okay, I said. Let's start with the basics. Half an hour later, I was sketching the network map on a notepad, showing where vulnerabilities hide, explaining the safeguards. My parents leaned in, listening, asking questions, jumping in with curiosity. Julian stood behind me, watching, proud. Remember the old table, preset to other people's stories? This. One had a new script. They weren't cheering, no applause, they just heard and saw. Mom asked, how can we help? The question wasn't about fixing a resume. It was about how we arrive at someone's desk and truly see what they've built. I looked around. I thought of General Stokes, of Lockhart Dynamics, of the boardroom where respect had to be earned. This, I said, tapping the map, is a Good start. For once, they listened. If you've ever had dinner where your growth finally lands, share where you are in the comments. And if this struck a chord, hit like and subscribe, because maybe this kind of understanding deserves a table of its own. I wanted them to meet the woman who saw me when they didn't. General Stokes arrived on a cool evening just as we were finishing setting the table. She stepped into my apartment with that confident, no-fluff presence, eyebrows raised in that half-smile she always does when she's already sizing up the room. Dad stood and offered her a seat without hesitation. Mom looked like she wanted to ask a question, but wasn't sure which one. General Stokes greeted them both with a nod. "Good to meet you again, Colonel Hayes." Her eyes caught Julian's, on the way in, and he stood to shake her hand. She didn't wait for ceremony, just firm grip and a quick pleasure. The table was simple: roasted chicken, root vegetables, couscous salad, nothing fancy. Stokes took it in stride, reaching for a plate and serving herself the same as everyone else. That was her style. Dinner started slowly, like a good briefing. Stokes looked at me and nodded once, quietly. I took that as, "You ready?" We dove in. Mom started, "General, Caroline told me you worked together at Fort Lee." "She did," Stokes said. "Madeline and I worked undercover in a joint exercise, live field ops, no script, no stand-in roles." Dad's eyebrows lifted. He seemed ready to listen for real. Stokes went on. "Thousands of personnel involved. We relied on intel feeds, drone overhead, but Madeline and her team were the ones who took the field. They flagged a communications sinkhole, changed the route, protected a convoy, all while the system showed thermal false positives. Without them, it could have been a disaster." Mom looked at me, then back at Stokes. "That sounds incredible." Stokes shrugged. "It's what she does. Quietly. But she built the algorithm that filtered the data. She wrote the codes that spoke faster than the network. Dad reached for his second helping." "You're saying she's working on live missions, not just desk exercises?" Stokes locked eyes with him. "Her team just went live with National Grid monitoring. No one gets past that filter. That's decades of data, and she built it from scratch." My father's hand paused over his fork. Silence fell. General Stokes spoke again. "Colonel Hayes was instrumental in developing multi-tier threat response. She pulled engineers, analysts, field commanders together. No one else had the ability to move between those worlds with clarity and speed. You'd be amazed how many lives quietly depended on her straight thinking." Mom dabbed at her eyes. "I can't believe we didn't know." Stokes turned to me. "You kept it quiet, delivered results. The department depended on it more than I think you ever expected." I looked at my parents. No words, just an acknowledgement of what was happening. General Stokes talked for another 10 minutes about cybersecurity rollouts, critical infrastructure, the bridge project outside Philadelphia. And each time she mentioned a mission, my parents leaned in. Each time she spoke of my leadership, Julian's expression stopped sliding from pride to envy. Instead, he just looked curious. After dinner, my father stood. "General, thank you for coming." "Truly," Stokes nodded. "Admirable daughter." Mom squeezed Dad's hand, then looked at me. "We had no idea what you do, but now we do." Stokes didn't toast. She just said, "I didn't build her. I revealed her." The words hung in the living room like a weight, a helpful weight. They didn't stand, but they all stayed seated, took it in. The respect in their eyes wasn't loud, but it was real. Maybe the first time, and for me, it felt like home. Their pride felt nice, but my peace came long before it. The evening had settled around me like a soft conclusion. My family lingered at the dining table, plates cleared, conversation now gentle and reflective. General Stokes had just left, vanishing, into the night without fuss, but the weight of what she said remained. Dad was quiet again, but not distant. He seemed fuller, expanded in some way, like he had room now to include more of me. Mom sat across from me, her knitting long forgotten. Julian was there too, shoulders relaxed, eyes more open than I'd seen in years. I looked around. The apartment felt different now. Not because I'd redecorated, but because it wasn't just mine anymore. It was ours. I let the silence stretch. I didn't need applause. I didn't need medals hung on walls or announcements on social media. What I had, here now, was enough. Their pride felt nice. But my peace came long before it. I thought of the uniform folded neatly in the corner, the nameplate on my desk, the badge on my door. Those weren't trophies. They were reminders of who I was, someone who had chosen hard work over easy approval, duty over comfort, clarity over noise. My chest tightened with gratitude. Not for them. For me. I spoke, softly. You know, I never did this for recognition. Mom leaned forward. We know that now. Good. I smiled. I did it because I believed it mattered. Julian nodded. It did. Dad cleared his throat. You did. We sat there for a moment, the only sound the hum of the fridge and distant sirens. It was quiet and warm. I took a breath. They used to say I ran away, I said, voice steady. But I didn't run from you. I ran toward something. Bigger, Mom wiped her eyes. We see it now. I turned to look at each of them. That's more than I ever asked for. They smiled back. I continued. I didn't prove you wrong. I proved myself right. That line landed soft, but it landed true. My father nodded slowly. Yes. My mother squeezed my hand, as if transferring the trust she'd withheld for years. Now returned. Julian reached over and tapped his glass. To you. I raised mine. To clarity. They clinked gently. It wasn't a toast to success or medals or awards. It was a nod to something deeper. Understanding, respect, acceptance, valiantly quiet but loud in meaning. From now on, I said, this table, it's ours. Mom leaned back, sewing her eyes around the room. No more scripts. No, more scripts, I echoed. We sat back, finished our wine, and talked about small things. The weather, plans for the weekend, Julian's new assignment. Not grand declarations, but a normal conversation. The kind I'd missed. Their pride felt comforting. But my peace? It had been hard-won. It came years ago, in moments no one saw. The breath before a mission, the quiet debrief after a long day. It happened in bunkers, in secure rooms, over MREs at midnight. It wasn't born tonight. Tonight was confirmation, because real victory isn't making others see you. It's finally seeing yourself and letting others come closer at their own speed. I stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city that had once been a blur on my way home. Now it looked familiar, grounded, mine. I turned back. Thanks for coming tonight. Dad stood and came beside me. Thank you for letting us. Mom and Julian joined us. We looked out together. Their pride felt nice. But my peace was deeper than applause. Let's keep building, I said. They nodded. And in that simple unity, I found home. If you've ever found your strength before anyone noticed, share your peace before pride moment in the comments. And if this story made you feel seen, just once, hit that like button and subscribe. Because real victory isn't applause. It's knowing you're right where you're meant to be.